And I'm going to turn this over to today's moderator, Dennis Pressler from Arizona. Thank you, Dennis.
Always helps to unmute. Hi, I'm Dennis Pressler with the State Archives of Arizona. I'm the State Archivist. I want to welcome everybody today for the CoSA presentation. NARA's FERMI Project, Accelerating Electronic Records Management, and the Oregon ORMS. I'm going to give Meg and Barbara a chance to chime in here at this time.
Hi, everyone. This is Meg Phillips, the External Affairs Liaison for the National Archives and Records Administration. And officially, on behalf of the National Archives, welcome to this CoSA-NARA webinar. We always enjoy collaborating with our colleagues at the State Archives, and we're really looking forward to this presentation. Thank you. Barbara?
Thank you, Meg. We really appreciate you in your role as External Affairs Liaison and how well you do that and all the things that you've done to help put this webinar together today. We appreciate the cooperation with NARA always, but particularly in this, I think what we're going to hear about today with trying to think more broadly and more futuristically about how we can do records management. So we're looking forward to hearing from our FERMI friends and also listening again to about ORMS and all of their advances that they've made in Oregon. So we appreciate you all being here today, and we do appreciate the cooperation of NARA staff, and we thank you for coming. And Dennis, I believe I turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you. All right, welcome everybody. We're going to discuss the agenda for today. We're looking at having presentations. We got three presenters, presentation from NARA and presentation from Oregon State Archives. And then everybody start thinking hard for some good questions that we can ask the panelists to answer. And then we'll wrap up with some announcements there. All right, I'll go ahead and get started. I want to introduce Bethany Cron. Beth is a member of the Records Management Policy and Outreach section within the Office of the Chief Records Officer at NARA. Her team has produced guidance on electronic messages, social media records, cloud computing, and capstone for email. She is currently working on the Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative, FERMI, to help agencies acquire services and solutions to meet their electronic records management requirements. She also leads the Microsoft 365 user group, which meets monthly to discuss how to address records management in Microsoft 365, which is a lot of stuff because yes. She is a graduate of the School of Information at the University of Michigan, a degree in Archives and Records Management, and DePaul University with a degree in History. Then I want to introduce Rian Ravankash. I hope I didn't butcher the name too much. Arian currently serves as the Supervisory Records Management Policy Analyst in the Office of the Chief Records Officer at NARA. Since 2006, he's worked on and now leads the Policy and Program Support Team. This team is primarily responsible for developing NARA records management guidance for federal agencies in support of the targets outlined in OMB NARA M1921, Transition to Electronic Records. The team is also responsible for NARA's Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative, or the FERMI Project. Prior to coming to NARA in 2000, Arian worked for 10 years at the Maryland State Archives, eventually becoming the Director of Geographic Services. He has served on the Board of Directors of NAGARA and as a member of the Society of American Archivists, ARMA International, and the Mid-Atlantic Regional Archives Conference. He holds a BA in Political Science from Washington College in Chesterton, Maryland. Christopher Stenson is the State Records Manager at the Oregon State Archives, where he helps state and local government agencies effectively manage their records in a rapidly changing technological landscape. He's a frequent presenter at government agencies and their association meetings, focusing primarily on topics surrounding technology and electronic records. Christopher is a strong advocate for a proactive approach to records management and archives, and is passionate about helping others get past their own technological and administrative hurdles. And I have lots of technological hurdles that I have to overcome myself. Christopher previously worked as administrator for the Oregon Records Management Solution, or the ORMS, and electronic records archivist for the Illinois State Archives, and has been an active member of the Council of State Archivists State Electronic Records Initiative since its inception. He currently serves on the National Association of Government Archives and Records Administrators Board of Directors. Christopher holds a master's degree in library science from Indiana University and an MA in history from Washington State University. I'll go ahead and turn this over to Arian. I think you're going to start.
Yes, I believe I'll take it from here. First, greetings to everyone from Annapolis, Maryland. I'm in my biography. I started my career at the Maryland State Archives, so I'm always happy to talk to state archivists. And I'm reminded that the last time I was on a panel or in the same room with Chris was in the before times, January 2020, when it seemed like everything was normal, and things have changed a lot since then. So it's good to see you again, Chris. Anyway, what I want to talk about is our FERMI project and what that means for you in state archives and other colleagues around the country in archives. First of all, the standard, what is NARA? I'm sure this audience knows NARA very well. I want to just focus on the right-hand side in the Office of the Chief Records Officer. I like to joke that we are the records administration part of the National Archives. So even though we have all those employees and all those locations and that budget, our staff is about 80, 90 people, and we're responsible basically for the records management aspects of the National Archives. And that includes our training program, our oversight and inspection teams, and our operations team, which is roughly what we call scheduling and appraisal. And Beth and I are part of the policy and outreach teams. We do sort of the records management policy for the federal government and the outreach piece, which I always manifest through our blog, Records Express, which is the resource I'd recommend you all follow if you want all things federal records management. When it comes to FERMI, most of these documents, if you've been following what we've been doing at the National Archives for about a decade, these will be old hat. These are not, this is where, when we talk about FERMI, we frame it as work that was started through this, the Presidential Memorandum of November 2011, and the Managing Government Records Directive of August 2012, which came out of that. So those were the pieces that set the government on this transformation from, as these documents talk about, sort of the old, basically 19th century approach to records management, which was paper being filed, and knowing that that had to shift to a 21st century records management paradigm where things are electronic. And those are all, the goals and targets are encapsulated in those documents. Today, the current version of that M1218 is the version M1921, and sort of built off what's in our strategic plan of 2018 to 2022. Now, you may be aware that our current, we're in the process of updating our strategic plan for the next 4 years, and that is in the comment period for that just closed, and we hope to have get that strategic plan review. We're reviewing all the comments that have come in, and we hope to get those resolved, improve the document, and then on to OMB for clearance and approval, hopefully later this fall. So keep your ears open for more about the next version of the strategic plan. But I think it's important that M1921 was based on the previous strategic plan. So the headline from those pieces is that all federal records created, retained, and managed must be in electronic format. So when you take a look at both of those things together, that's really the goal, that all of the records are created, retained, and managed electronically with appropriate metadata. And then the other piece is that we've instructed agencies to develop plans to transfer their paper out of their custody and into the federal record centers or commercial storage facilities. That's the other part of that's driving the direction we're going. As a part of that, we have these transformational targets. The two at the top come basically out of the M1218 goal, directive, where agencies have to manage all their email electronically, and then all of their permanent records electronically by the end of 2019. Those were the targets that were carried over from M1218 into the new document. The further yardstick that was put down in M1921 is that we will revise our records management regulations to support this transition. to fully electronic government. OPM will revise position descriptions. And I think the next 3 goals on this slide are the ones that people are we get the most questions about. Federal agencies have to manage all of their permanent records in electronic format. Federal agencies have to manage all their temporary records in electronic format or store them in commercial record storage facilities. And then after December 2022, NARA will no longer accept the transfer of permanent or temporary records in analog formats, meaning we will no longer accept paper. Now, the first question we always get, or the question we've been getting for the last 18 months is that deadline going to change, given the fact that all of our facilities are in various reduced operation statuses? And the short answer to that is we are working with OMB in the context of the new strategic plan, in the context of sort of those discussions to see if we can't move that target forward. I'll just leave it at that. We could have when we get to the Q&A piece, we can have a longer conversation about that if people desire. So out of all of that, so all of those are sort of the guidance frameworks and the things that we're trying to achieve. The program that we've created, or the initiative that we've created at the National Archives, is what we've called the FERMI Project, the Federal Electronic Records Modernization Initiative. And FERMI has 2 main goals. And the first goal is we want to be able to help agencies in the federal government obtain records management solutions and services through improving the procurement process. For years, as noted in my background, that I've been on this policy team for a long time, and we've always got the question, or the conversation was, NARA, you do a great job of telling us what I need to do and even why it's important, but you never tell me how to do it. So FERMI's our answer to that, like give agencies some tools, give agencies some guidance on how they can start to get to that promised land of managing all of their records electronically. And the other thing we thought is FERMI would allow us to be a little more nimble and address some of the things that are happening at the federal level by being able to work in different spaces. And the way I want to talk about that is in an upcoming slide, but just knowing that agencies are changing the way they work, and we want to be able to be nimble enough to change our records management guidance as that happens. So some of the benefits of FERMI are just what's on this slide. We want to create government-wide standards to partner with industry to support innovation. We want the vendors in the space to understand what federal agencies need for electronic records management, so to help close that procurement gap, the challenge we have with procurement. The government is also, the federal government is moving a lot in the shared services space, and I'm sure some of the states out there are investigating shared services as well. I know the Canadians are very active through their Shared Services Canada initiative. I've heard about initiatives in the UK as well along shared services. And that's just consolidating a lot of these administrative functions. And knowing that if you're running a government and you have all these departments that have to have a travel program, it makes sense to have one solution or 2 solutions. Instead of, in the federal government, there's 250 agencies, 300 agencies. They shouldn't have to each buy a travel system. There should be 1 or 2 travel systems. And a lot of that is built off of this memorandum, which is not quite a records management memorandum, but it is something that framed our thinking. M1916 is around sharing quality services. And one of those services that's called out in this memorandum and the supporting administrative presidential management agenda that went out with this M1916 was the recognition that electronic records management is a cross-cutting service that can be shared across the government. So all of those pieces are to say that we've just got the basics of that's what FERMI is, and that's the framework. And I'll turn the presentation over to my colleague Beth Cron now to take a deeper dive into the requirements and the tools that are available for agencies. So Beth.
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Arian, for setting the stage for talking about what we are doing right now with FERMI. So first, I just want to say, yes, we're trying to address that problem that Arian just mentioned. So we've seen gaps in knowledge and expertise between the records management folks and the procurement or acquisition people. So the records management people, they know what they want to do. They have a clear requirement, but they don't always know how to translate that into the contracting language that will actually lead to the procurement of services or solutions. So we're attempting to bridge that gap. And the first document out that we did as part of FERMI in consultation with the General Services Administration, or GSA, they recommended that we develop a universal electronic records management requirements. And we worked with a number of agency stakeholders to develop these. And they're just what they sound like. They are, they identify high-level business needs for managing electronic records. And we see them as the baseline program requirements that are derived from existing NARA regulations, policies, and guidance, as well as standards. So there's a likelihood that these could be applied to your state organization, so something to keep in mind, but would likely need to be adapted. We intend for these to be a starting point for agencies to use when developing their system and program requirements, and then the records managers work with the IT personnel and acquisitions folks to tailor any final system requirements. So as you know, there's a risk that a one-size-fits-all approach, it's not going to all work completely, so we recognize that. So the document contains a few tabs, has an abstract, list of requirements, list of transfer format requirements, and a glossary. And I want to talk about just a few ways that we've seen agencies using this document when they're identifying how a service or solution can meet their needs, or when implementing a new system. For example, going through this document to identify how they're going to meet all the requirements in SharePoint or Microsoft 365 or another system. So we've seen it used as a starting point for writing a statement of work or a statement of objectives. So next slide, if we go to the first example that we've heard, so these are a few examples how we've heard agencies using this requirements document. Acquisitions in IT departments, they often ask records managers for a list of requirements when they're purchasing a new system. They ask them what the system can do, and figuring out and writing those requirements can be a very resource intensive process. And so we want to avoid duplicating work and making sure that we're sharing this work so it doesn't have to be done again. Records managers can give this to their IT people department and avoid creating requirements for each new acquisition. And then possibly when they say this is too much, maybe take out use just the metadata requirements, or decide a subset that would be appropriate for your organization. In the next example, on the next slide, we've heard of agencies incorporating a tailored version of this into the system development lifecycle process. So we recognize that this would be an ideal world. Obviously, we always aim to see records managers involved and at the table when making decisions to make sure that records management is addressed in all systems. So this would be a checklist type of thing where IT must show how they're going to meet that requirement before implementing a new system. In the next example, you've heard of agencies attaching requirements to requests for information to say you need a solution that meets these requirements. And you can then use this through whatever system or way you would do procurement in your organization. And then in the last example, so the requirements document is in an Excel format. So you could add columns to indicate how your organization will fulfill each requirement. So using it as a type of worksheet to show what the user action is, whether you need a policy, an agreement, modification to the terms of service, and then indicate whether an IT administrator needs to take steps or if any can be automated. So then you can add columns to indicate if end users need to do anything, if you need custom development, and possibly the level of effort. So you could use this as a document to help you in that way. So the next slide. as Arjen said, a huge part of what we've been doing with FERMI is developing standards. We want to make sure that records management requirements are addressed by vendors and agencies in similar ways. And so we've done this through partnerships with GSA and with agencies. And as Arjen said, we're working on improving the procurement process. And then we're also working with a group at GSA to build records management into shared services. We want to make sure that records management is actually part of the service that's offered. For example, a travel or a payroll system. These are mission support services that nearly all agencies use. And we want to make sure that if the system is creating records, that it's actually managing those records and possibly having an appropriate retention applied in the system as well. So these are some of the service areas that we're working with: financial management, HR, cybersecurity, and NARA is the lead for electronic records management. And what all of these service areas are doing are building a federal integrated business framework. So a lot of words to say that we're trying to document the common processes that we use in our daily work in all of these areas. And so we're using this common methodology. We are applying electronic records management to this framework, even though it doesn't quite fit some of the way those other ones do. But it's getting more exciting for us now because we're starting to identify the cross-functional capabilities between the different areas. So we can actually look at the other standards and say, hey, this is where records are being created, and this is the general record schedule item that will likely apply to those records. So we are going around this wheel that you see on the slides here, and I'll just touch on a few of the documents that we have, a few that we have out and a few in progress. So the first one up is the business lifecycle and capabilities. This is the foundational document for the FIBF, and then the other pieces build upon it. It's a little bit more detailed than the universal ERM requirements, and it's in Excel, so it can be moved around and reused as well. So we hope that by describing in a consistent way, agencies, vendors, and other service providers will have a better understanding of ERM needs. So these are business scenarios. They do step-by-step. It shows an ideal flow of events of how records should be created, managed, etc. And it is an ideal flow of events due to agency-specific situations and processes. You're going to have starts and stops and steps that are not shown. So for example, it doesn't go specific enough to say this is how you capture when using social media tools. It's at a high level, and it's an ideal form of the way it would be done. And another thing about all of the standards we're developing is that we intend for them to be system and approach agnostic, meaning there are some agencies that might be doing this work on a very manual level, and some that might be doing it fully automated. So we recognize it doesn't matter how it's accomplished, but that these goals, the end goals, are accomplished. So whether it's a traditional records management system or it's embedded records management, just that there are different ways to do it. So building on the capabilities, we have use cases. We call them universal use cases, and these provide example workflows of how this could work across the records lifecycle. These are also an ideal flow of events. We included some workflow diagrams to try to explain it a little bit better. And the hope is that agencies could use these as a comparison tool when asking different vendors and service providers how they perform the same workflow. So how do you bring a record under records management control? Bringing under control, that could be capturing it in a record keeping system, or that could be tagging or some other type of control. So we don't want to specify an approach, but just to say that this is the goal and how could you demonstrate that you meet that that workflow. So next one up, so this is based on the records lifecycle. We have an overview document and 4 use cases, and we talk about specific applications like for social media or cloud services or shared drives and those types of formats within those documents. So the next one are the standard data items. These are under OMB review. The previous 2 I talked about are up on the website and you can view those. They're in a finalish form. The standard data items, we created these to be baseline data items. They're built on NARA's Electronic Records Archives metadata dictionary and NARA's minimum metadata bulletin. And so what we want to do with these is create the baseline that all of the other shared services should be capturing with regards to records management. So we tried to keep it as minimal as possible, including, so if you look on the next slide, there's a few of those, the terms, creator, date, description, and those are based on the metadata bulletin that we put out, and which is based on Dublin Core. So we want to make sure that we have some government-wide records management data that should be captured by all of the other shared services providers. So the next slide. So we are working with the multiple award schedule team at GSA. There was previously a special item number that is a procurement vehicle with a list of vendors. There was one that was a mix, and so they separated them out into physical and electronic records management, and this is the first time we've had this. So in order to be added to this list, vendors have to self-certify that they meet our universal electronic records management requirements. So this has been a very helpful tool for agencies. You can go and you can look at the list and see pricing information and other information about those vendors. Next slide. So we're thinking about other ways we can continue to bridge that gap between records management and acquisition. We've developed a sample statement of objectives for an ERM program needs assessment, and we've shared that with GSA, and I'll share a link here in a moment where you can look at some of the other buying guides that GSA has put together, and we're always looking at opportunities for training. There's definitely a lot to learn from the contracting folks about just kind of the language and just kind of interpreting things. One term could be understood in one way in records management, and then in the acquisitions folks, it could mean something else. And I was thinking about the GSA set up an ERM working group, and they met yesterday, and just in hearing some of the vendors and contracting officers talk, I've really learned a lot about how we all work and how we can better work together. So next slide. Here's the information to keep current on the various projects that we're working on of the FERMI webpage. And if you have any questions or like have a follow-up with us, rmpolicy@nara.gov is the way to reach us. So thank you all, and I am going to turn it over to Chris now.
Thank you very much. Let's test, make sure I can actually do this. Where I show my long experience doing webinars, which I have with not being able to do basic functions like navigating my slides. Okay, I've got the little grabby thing. Isn't it responding to me?
If you put your mouse on the little arrow just below the number, you should be able to advance to the next slide. See if that works.
Just below the, oh, I see there. Okay, it's all in the left. Sorry, hidden over there. There we go. Cool. All right, thank you. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Chris Stenson. Today, it's a slight switcheroo. So I will be talking about ORMS, but for many of you who have heard about ORMS for many years and have heard the same spiel, we're doing something a little different. I'm going to be talking about ORMS. I'm also going to be talking about the next iteration of electronic records management here in Oregon and the efforts we're pushing for the next couple of years. So we're going to start. Go. They gave my intro at the beginning, so I don't need to belabor this. But what is my role is more appropriate, right? So I'm the state records manager. I am responsible for retention schedules and statewide records management practice in Oregon. That covers both state agencies and local entities all across the state. I oversee the Oregon Records Management Solution, known as ORMS. I was formerly the direct administrator of that. Now I supervise the administrator of it, but it's still ultimately in my area of responsibility. And I am also, my big effort now is implementing role-based retention across state government within M365. So that is a huge portion of my brain space occupied these days. So a brief recap for those of you who may not be familiar with ORMS. We have presented on this very topic with CoSA a number of times over the years in various venues. And of course, if people want to have a deeper dive within this, I'm always happy to talk to them separately. So basically, ORMS is a statewide electronic records management service that we have been working with a private partner on since 2011. So we hit our 10-year anniversary this year. We're pretty proud of that, especially in light of many prognostications in the earlier years of inevitable failure. So we're pretty pleased. As I say, our best counter argument is our continued existence. So in 2011, we piloted a public-private partnership with 10 agencies representing different levels of government in Oregon. Our private partners handled the business and IT, so they handle the contracting. It's run software as a service style, so they handle all of that side of it and do the direct IT support. They maintain the data center and all that. Whereas on the archive side, we would do training and file structure and retention work within the system. We would work with agencies a lot on how they're going to use the system and how we're going to put records in and all that sort of thing. By 2015, we are up to 33 agencies. It was at that point that the state archives hired their first ORMS administrator. So prior to that, the state records manager was responsible for both that and all the other duties. Early on, when it was still a pilot, that may have seemed doable. But by 2015, it was clearly not a sustainable practice. And so hiring a ORMS administrator who could direct their time solely at this and making it a successful project was a good time. I was the first one, not to toot my own horn, it just happened to be that way. And part of that role in 2015 was to really revamp and standardize our processes and builds. As often happens in a pilot project that then grows organically, is that things were a little bit squishy. We very much custom sort of here to here. And so part of my role then was to really standardize our procedures, create a playbook, so to speak, a standard sort of script we follow, not in terms of actually what we say, but in terms of how we implement each new agency, that sort of thing, and to ensure that we could grow effectively. There was also a lot of effort put into outreach and marketing to get more agencies to participate. And I can report that that was a great success because by this year, we hit over 101 different implementations, which is pretty astounding from where we once were when we think back to the early days. Now, with this success, means that we've once again had to really rethink how we support our agencies. So we are currently in the latter phases of revamping our whole support model, really to alleviate some of the burden on our archive staff, because our team is still quite small. We have the ORMS administrator and 3 records analysts, plus myself, to do this. And so it is a big lift to stay on top of this all the time. And I misspoke, 4 records analysts. We were at 3 for most of the last year and a half. We finally hired a 4th recently. So, but nonetheless, a lot of lifting. So we are switching to a train the trainer model, which has less direct interaction between us and the agencies and more of a supportive from the top down. We will continue providing back-end build support and record support for what we are specialists in.
But training will be done via a new training library that we've been creating and through agency coordinators, which will take a more active role. So a lot of all of this is making sure that we have the right people in place with the implementation. So this, we hope, will lead us to the next phase and make this a more sustainable project. So you can see I've got a couple little charts here. So you can see our growth over 10 years, which is pretty cool. Over time, it does kind of level out. So it's a little bit deceptive in ways, though. It was pretty slow for the first 4 years as it was still in a pilot phase, and quite frankly, lack of cooperation on the state level did make it a pretty slow build. However, right around 2014, 2015, with the shift in priorities and the real push towards active engagement, we really did see a steady growth, and really we've hit about just shy of 10 agencies a year for its through its lifespan now, which is a pretty good growth rate considering what that represents in terms of total government records potentially managed. And then you can see here a map of where all of our current agencies that we work with are. So Oregon's a big state, but the population is highly concentrated among a sort of corridor there on the west side. That does not mean, however, that we aren't doing far-flung outreach. So we have entities in far eastern counties that have a few thousand people in them, for example, which presents its own challenges, but it does represent a chance to really do what we were hoping to do, which is democratize access to electronic records management. That's always been the goal, so that it was not a system of haves and have-nots. The idea is that everybody should have a relatively level playing field to do effective ERM. So part of our evolving practice, every phase of the way, has been to ensure that we are sustainable and that we can maintain our level of quality of our work and look after our own team so as not to burn them out. So one-on-one trainings, which has been a hallmark of the program from the beginning, is really great as a selling feature. The customer clients love them. However, our staff has not increased with the client load. And many of these clients require a lot of, they hire new people, they do this or they do that, and we've really poured ourselves out to really just like make sure they had everything they need. But that's led directly to staff burnout and really just grinding through a lot of stuff. And so my biggest concern as a manager in this situation is to make sure that we can continue doing this in the long haul, because we're not going to get a dozen more staff. We are roughly where we're going to be. And so we need to make sure we can handle this over time. Also, we'd like to shift from a model of what I call wildcat growth, which is when I first came on board, it was a talk to anybody who wants to talk to me, throw myself all over the place, bring people in, work with them however they want to be worked with, which is great for rapid growth, but hard to then transition into a more mature program. So this is part of our shift to a more sustainable, mature program over time. Our new train the trainer model and resource library will shift responsibility to the agencies. So it's all about clear responsibilities. And I think most of the time with those responsibilities, agencies are familiar with this. They know they have to take ownership. So a lot of this is just being careful about how we talk about it and making sure that folks know this is your responsibility. We are facilitators in this case. So this will help us as well, because we will be able to focus our attention at those areas that really do need an expert from our team, and not just spend our whole time doing the sort of low-level stuff that, quite frankly, should be handled on a sort of a tier 1 basis. So our team will now focus on records management within the system and other maintenance activities. And also, we're embarking, and I'm going to get to this pretty quick here, shifting a lot of our priorities statewide in light of new technological advances. And I'm going to need resources to pull and apply to those areas. And so I can't do that if our whole team is 90% of their time working on ORMS. So we have to figure out a balance point. So we will be sort of rebalancing where we focus a lot of our time. So this then brings us to last year, right? So 2020, a momentous year for 1,000 different reasons, many of them awful, a lot, but a few of them weird silver linings. So part of this was the forced jump into a whole new technology. We all know, we work for government, we know government moves slow, and often the folks pulling the strings are those most invested in not changing things. And so change is difficult to implement. However, nothing like a pandemic and forcing everybody to work from home to rapidly force through that. So what happened is everyone went home, and then the planned rollout of M365, which was going to happen anyways, got accelerated to warp speed Now, it was a little chaotic at first. We jumped into all this without a whole lot of thought about what we were going to do right away. It was just getting people to be able to work. So we launched really fast last March. Our agency, the Secretary of State, we were one of the first within the state to do it. So we had to scramble to establish work practice and policy, while at the same time, statewide IT was simply focused on keeping things running, getting new agencies onboarded. So trying to work on policy and how people should use it, while at the same time, many of the folks running it just wanted to make sure it could operate, led to some challenging misalignments of priorities. And it's taken most of a year to work our way to a point where I think we're really moving towards a more policy-focused future with this. So part of that full credit goes to the hiring of a chief data officer for the state a couple of years ago. She is one of us. She previously worked for the city of Austin, has done records management in the past, so she knows what is what. And so she and I reached out to her to say, hey, I have these concerns. And she then plugged me directly into the statewide leadership group for it, which was great. And so we've been working ever since on crafting statewide IT messaging and establishing sustainable practice for the next few years. So where are we at right now? We're a long ways from where we want or need to be, but we do have a rough plan being formed. So there is, as of right now, no current retention policy application within SharePoint and the associated applications. So the whole suite, we are not currently doing any policy application. And why is that? Well, the point is from the start, they wanted to make this at the state level sustainable for them to manage, which meant as close to a one-size-fits-all solution as possible. Now, unfortunately, that's not going to work in all cases. And I was the one throwing the cold water on it quite a bit, saying now we can't just apply a bulk policy without planning it out. Simultaneously, we couldn't just let all the agencies start slapping policies on things, or we'd end up with the same problem that had happened in previous technological leaps, where we didn't do the RM first, and therefore things were chaotic and it became impossible to unpack later. So we have an opportunity to do things the right way now, and it just means having a little bit of patience when it comes to this. So status quo basically means everything is kind of just being kept indeterminately for the time being as we work towards establishing what the policy should be and how they're going to be applied. So there is, we've arrived towards a policy recommendation, which is that there will be a 3-year default on chats within Teams, which is of course the most visible and most actively used aspect of Microsoft 365. And 3 years from last modified date on discrete files. Now, is this actually a records management policy? Of course not. But what it does is sets a useful bottom line retention that we can then work from, right? We can identify our exception cases. We can identify what the system should or should not be used for. So having a benchmark is really important, and I was supportive of setting that benchmark. Now, as I note, this has not yet been set in the system, but this is what's being discussed at the state leadership level. And I am supportive of this because the alternative is to have no actual backstop. And in that case, nobody has any motivation to do the work. So we need to have some sort of goad to get people to move in this direction. Now, one thing we are a little further along with is within Exchange. Because email is a more traditional system and more people are more familiar at the agencies of how to use it, that is being implemented earlier. Now, we are also going with a 3-year backstop, which once again is not a records management policy. However, I have gotten the agreement from statewide leadership that as part of this, we will have the opportunity to identify alternative retention groups within that. And then we will have time before the first purge goes into effect to get those implemented at the agencies. So the clock started ticking on July 1st of this year, which gives essentially 3 years to get this done across state government. It's a good amount of time, but is it infinite? Not at all. And of course, we know there will be some hiccups, and we do reserve the right to, when we get a couple months from the deadline, saying we're going to need a few more months, and I think we'll get that if we need to. This is our target to get this to happen. So what does that really mean, though? What has to happen before we can, in fact, start purging things? Well, first of all, we know 3-year default does not meet all retention needs, nor does telling agencies to just go ahead and pull out all the emails that need to be kept for longer. We know that won't work as well. And that was a hard conversation I had to have and say, well, no, the entire field of records management has been debating this for years, and we've tried it and it's never successfully worked. So let's please not do that. I think we finally come to an equilibrium point on that. So what do we need to do? Well, this has accelerated our other effort that we've been trying to get going for a few years, which is to implement a role-based retention policy, spinning off of Capstone in some ways, but a little more granular than that. So the idea is to allow agencies to identify alternative retention groups within the agency, which we could then apply on the back end, but a limited number of those. So we're envisioning having at most maybe 6 or 8 different retention categories that can be applied. So it's not an infinite number of them. It makes the support easier. It means we'll be rounding up a lot. So how do we get there, right? So that still doesn't, so this is where we're looking for, it still doesn't answer how the heck we're going to get there. Well, first of all, then this is all our team's work. First of all, we have to ensure that over 75 retention schedules are up to date. And I should be clear on that. I made the slide and then I got the exact number. We have 76 agencies to which this would apply, agencies, boards, and commissions. And then we also have a general schedule, which we need to make sure is applicable in this case. So we have a lot of schedules that we have to make sure are updated. And of those, I'm not going to say how many of those are reasonably current, but not enough, shall we say. So there's a lot of these, and we essentially have to look at every single one and ensure that they are. Now, we will be facilitating agencies doing role-based analysis and creating retention groups. So essentially, we're committing to working with every single entity, every single state entity in the state. And then we're going to associate the retention with each employee group. And you could say the default's going to be 3 years, and then other groups will be identified. And we aren't sure exactly what those year buckets will be, but we'll figure out what those are. And then agencies will have the ability to apply those retentions within the Exchange and SharePoint environments to those groups. That is something they will be able to do at the agency IT administrator point. All sounds pretty simple, right? Well, of course, what are we actually committing to? Well, first of all, I have publicly committed for our state archives records management team that we will provide templates, we will provide process documents and guides, we will run workshops for staff that are spearheading processes. Notice I'm not committing to directly talking to 1,000 staff at every agency. We're talking about holding group workshops as well as insightful meetings with specific agency leadership. We will provide assistance on specific sticky areas. So if agencies are struggling with decision making, we will be there to help break those ties. And we're hoping to be able to connect agencies to other agencies to help them help each other, right? Because we know with our fairly small team, our really small team, let's be honest, we don't have enough employee hours to do this all with every agency. So we're going to rely on them to help themselves a lot. We're also asking other agencies to commit their own resources in a way. We want to create a community of practice that will allow them to communicate directly with one another and share their own experiences so that like agencies can work with like agencies. We are hoping they share their lessons learned and to share their work and processes. Like, this is sort of a commitment. We are going to do this collectively as a group. Now, what does that mean, however, to organize? Well, here's our, sorry, before I get into that, here's our rough timeline, and it is very rough. If you look closely at this timeline, you'll notice, very key, I have no actual details on this. So I'm not actually promising anything. This is something I presented to the State CIO Council a week or two ago. It looks real pretty. Thank you, default templates. But basically, this is where we're aiming, right? So we're going to get SOS done in the early fall. We're going to immediately start working with other agencies. Simultaneous to this, we're getting word out, and we're going to try to get agencies working on their schedules as soon as possible, because obviously that has to happen first. So we're going to be rolling these out over the next few years. We know towards the end of this process that there will absolutely be some hesitant or slow or frankly clueless entities that just haven't paid any attention. Some of these are very small boards and commissions. They have almost no staff. We're going to have to do the legwork with them. And in that situation, we know we're going to have to reserve some resources to do that. So we shall see, and hopefully the big fellas can take care of themselves more or less once we get them rolling. Okay, last slide. So the challenges we face, right? So our records management team is very small, and we have other commitments. Some of our schedules are very out of date, and it's a slow process to update them. Some of these huge entities that have gone through 2 or 3 reorgs and we've never been able to catch up schedule-wise, that's going to take a lot of time. So we have to get started on those right away, because that will likely be a year or more revision process. Sub-agencies, we know, will require a lot of help. That's just reality. Coordinating communications is an unexpected challenge. The administration of all of this, you know, I don't have a project manager to help guide this. And so trying to do this while also being the subject matter expert can be challenging. And of course, along with that, organizing and keeping track of so many parallel projects is something we are discussing constantly on how we're going to make this work. What resources can we bring to bear? So it's a fun and interesting new challenge. It's a little daunting, but I think we can do it. And there's my contact info. I'm going to skip the questions because I know that's a part of a joint thing now, so you can always find me afterwards. So I'm going to turn it back over again.
Thank you. That was really interesting. So we're in the questions section right now. So if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat. Right now, we do have a couple questions in there. One is, did you reference the DoD 5015.2 in the ERM requirements?
I assume that's for us at NARA.
Yeah.
So what I'll say is anyone who's been working in this space for a long time has sort of recognized 5015 as sort of one of the starting points for really thinking about electronic records in a more systemic way. I remember almost 20 years ago, we put out an endorsement of that standard, but it's 20 years old. So it has gone through, without getting into the DoD politics and back and forth that they've gone through, and it's kind of grown stale over time, and it's a big macro level system. It kind of envisioned records management as for lack of a better way to describe it, as a big repository that stuff gets fed into and pushed to, and that's not really the way modern office architecture works, whether it's in government or even in the private sector. So we didn't necessarily refer to 5015 explicitly in the updated Universal Electronic Records Management Standards. We do recognize sort of that a lot of the effort in 5015 sort of paved the way and got vendors interested in the space, and that's important, right? But they're looking to adapt and move forward. So I think what I would say is that's not a part of the thinking now, but some of the concepts, if you start to unpack and dig deep into our universal ERM requirements, you can easily trace back. You can find a companion piece in the DoD standard. And I'll let Beth chime in if she wants to add anything to that.
Just to say that I was talking earlier about being more agnostic as to the approach for doing records management, and 5015 is the opposite of that. It's very prescriptive of how you're going to do that, and so we want to be more creative for what the approaches could be, which is why we have the universal requirements, taking it up to a higher level.
Great, thank you. There's another question. I think this one here is for Chris. Does the ORMS give the customer their own database, or is the ORMS based on a common database for all customers?
Right, so we actually, it's a little bit of both. We do have certain agencies that have their own based upon typically CGIS requirements. So we have a few that are specialized data, and they have to be isolated from one another. Most agencies are actually within shared data sets, but they're sequestered by metadata and security rules. And that's simply because one cannot run 101 separate data sets with any level of efficiency. So we have currently, we may have 5 or 6 we operate now. So we kind of, there's a certain maximum capacity for each one we can handle. And so we just kind of spill them over to the next one.
And I see that Stephanie Clark has added a link in the chat that gives more information there.
Yes, thank you, Stephanie.
Yeah. To everyone, is the ORMS also a repository for your digital archival records, or do they transfer to a different system?
Yeah, so we led on the records management front in the belief that you got to handle the front end or you'll never get the stuff on the back end. But at this point, we are in the process at the archives of having a separate archival data set. Up to this point, we've only had our active SOS data set. And so we are building currently our archival repository using the same model in a separate data set that we will be keeping our digital archival records within, yes. It's not yet mature, it's not quite there yet. We've had some staffing challenges and getting on that project, but it will be happening in the next year or two.
And there's another question for the NARA folks. What is NARA doing to help agencies make progress toward fully record keeping and meeting the goals of the M1921?
So thank you. I'll start with this one as well. And I think it's important that what we're trying to do is get agencies the tools, point them the resources they need, and the things that can help them get to that, whether that's through our guidance, our different pieces of guidance that we issue. I think, Chris, you made a really good point about talking about how the pandemic, given all the terrible things that happened, it was a driver in the electronic records management space to really have agencies start to really embrace the technologies in a much more rapid way, especially for government. I thought that was a great point. And we've seen that, of course, at the federal level, and we've been asked to issue guidance around collaboration platforms. And sort of that's one area that we're working on, is how do we give agencies guidance on using Google Hangout or WebEx or Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whatever. So I mean, these are the kinds of things that agencies are doing, and we want to be able to give them good records management guidance and advice in those areas. And the other thing I'd point to is just our strategic plan. Sort of as our strategic plan evolves, we're going to give agencies more tools in their arsenal to hopefully create those electronic, or make sure that electronic records management becomes parts of the solutions that they're rolling out government-wide, as opposed to being something that holds and keeps the government from innovating.
Okay. Did you have something to add, Beth?
Oh, no, absolutely. Just agreeing with the pandemic and the push to, for example, Microsoft 365. I've read articles about agencies kind of transitioning, working around the clock over a few days and getting it rolled out, like Chris was talking about. But then a lot of records officers are trying to catch up right now and figure out, you know, we got G3 and we're realizing this is really tough to do records management. So that would be a very interesting discussion. I'd love to hear more from Chris on what they're doing. So definitely a challenge.
Okay, I think we got time for one more question. This will go to Chris. What licensing scheme will you use to give patrons access to archival e-records in the ORMS system?
So that's actually a really good question. Obviously, there's a few different methods. So there is a built-in web publishing platform. So the web publishing platform allows for a self-service search for the public. Literally anyone in the public can go and search records that have been published out. It is a search platform into that. Also, we can pre-embed heavily used searches, and we do that for a lot of our heavily requested stuff, and just embed links on our website. They can directly access them that way. However, not everybody is comfortable or savvy with that. Of course, at the very least, it remains a rapid way for our own staff to respond to reference requests and produce records and then send them out to folks that may not feel comfortable accessing themselves. And also, we've discussed the potential of also having an on-site terminal sort of system where they can have direct access as well, and sort of a in-between, like assisted. Obviously, right now, we're not letting anybody in the building, so that's on hold, but that's another possibility. So there could be multiple layers of this to make it as effective as possible.
Great, thank you, everybody. I think I will go ahead and turn this over to Lisa to finish up. So Lisa.
Thanks, Dennis. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers today for really great presentations. Lots of really good information. And I think Stephanie's comment in the chat is really good in that, particularly for states, or the Oregon model is available, and that you guys are more than willing to share and help anybody that might be interested in moving forward with this kind of a direction. So thank you for that. So now we just want to remind you that if you enjoyed today's webinar, we hope that you will join us for future CoSA webinars. Here's the next couple that are coming up, and you can certainly go register for them so that you're already set to go when they come. We're excited about the different possibilities. So we hope we'll see you at a future webinar. Naturally, there's lots of ways to stay in touch. So staying in touch with CoSA is available lots of different ways: website, resource center, Twitter, Facebook, etc. And then of course our NARA friends, they also have lots of ways to stay in touch, and we hope that you will do that as well. So again, we'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for the webinar. There should be, we hope, a short evaluation as you exit. Please do take a couple of minutes and fill it out if you would, because that really does help our education committee as they plan and move forward and try to provide additional program for you. And as we put together our next CoSA-NARA webinar. So Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you presenters. Thank you Dennis for being our moderator. And we look forward to seeing everyone at our next webinar event. Thank you and have a great week and a great afternoon. Take care. Bye everyone.